Fellowship said, Amen. Everybody go ahead and have a seat.
Good morning, everybody. I don't know how many people in here have siblings, but quite a few of us. Yep, okay. Because siblings are a unique relationship depending upon the age, depending upon sisters, brothers, all of that fun stuff. But I feel like most people can understand a sibling dynamic. I am the younger sister of two kids in my family. To me, we had a great relationship. We were great friends our entire childhood. Yes, I was the younger one, so maybe I got off a little easier. You'd have to ask my sister, but I don't think so. I was just a really good kid. I don't remember getting disciplined that often. I am a rule follower still, mostly to this day. Speeding doesn't count. Um, Things like that and stuff. But sibling dynamics. For however long my sister and I are on this planet, we will always be sisters. We haven't lived in the same state since I graduated high school, I think, which was a couple years ago. You can guess how many, but I'm not going to confirm or deny either number you guess. But either way, siblings are siblings, and that's something most of us can understand or relate to in one form or another. Some of that dynamic stays the same, some of it's going to change. We do, as we grow up, as we mature, so do our dynamic in our relationship with people that we've known since we were little. And today, we're going to be digging into the sibling of a character that's pretty well known in the Bible. Most people have heard of Moses for a few different things, but he is not the one we're talking about. He's too well known for this series. Our series, New Phone Who Dis? People that you maybe haven't heard of, or if you've heard of, you've never really, you just pass through their name. So Moses actually has more than one sibling. We all probably know his brother Aaron. It's not him. They actually have an older sister, and her name is Miriam. And so she is the one that we are going to dig into today. She is mentioned a few different times throughout the Bible. She's got at least 3 stories where she is specifically talked about. So the very first one is also the first time where we hear of Moses, way back in the Old Testament, Exodus chapter 2. And that's where we're going to start. Exodus 2, 3 through 8. She got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister, Miriam, stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her female slave to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This is one of the Hebrew babies," she said. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yes, go," she answered. So the girl went and got the baby's mother, also her mom. That is an interesting story. The first couple times I read through it, I didn't really think about who the girl was or put much connection to it, but it was something that I was like, that's pretty bold. Because she was the girl who went up to Pharaoh's daughter. She's the sister, Pharaoh's daughter. Pharaoh was the ruler of the land. He had made a decree where all of the Hebrew babies were to be killed for a while, which is why they had to hide him, and their mom had been trying to hide Moses because he was born within the period where all the babies were being killed. All the male babies were being killed. So then when she couldn't hide him anymore, she sent him down the river, and Pharaoh's daughter, who actually couldn't have her own children, found him and then raised him as her own, but let the Hebrew women nurse him, which actually happened to be Moses' mom. It's a little confusing, but not when you stop and think about who each person is. And focusing on Miriam and her time, in her part in that story, at that age, she was about 12 years old. I don't know about you, but when I was 12 years old, there was no way on earth that I was going to go up to the king's daughter, the president's daughter, and say, "Hey, do you want me to do something?" You don't do that. I didn't. I would never have thought about it. Then again, I was a quieter person. That might be shocking to believe. I still tend to be on the quiet side because I'm more of a thinker than a talker. hence the shirt, because I haven't found a shirt that fits me better than this. It just says, I'm thinking. So if you ever see me standing off to the side or sitting quiet, you can guess that I'm thinking about something. Usually it's related to what everybody else is talking about, but I still have my squirrel moments. But I was more of a thinker than a talker. I still am at my core. So talking to strangers, not something that came easily to me. Talking to royalty, never would have happened. I would have stayed hiding in the tall grass on the riverbank, just watching how it played out, most likely. But this is one of the many lessons that we can learn from Miriam. She did not let fear cause her to miss out on the opportunity to make sure that their mom actually got to be a part of raising her little baby brother. And that's just amazing to me. So we should not let fear cause us to miss out on things. The next time that Miriam is mentioned is after they flee Egypt. Before then, I'm going to go back. Miriam was around 12 years old. Aaron, we know of Aaron. At this time, he was probably 5 or 6 because he was old enough that he was born and growing up before the decree to kill the babies, but then there was baby Moses. So 12, 6, and baby boy. Those are the ages at that time. Fast forward quite a few years. Moses' story takes him away from Egypt and back to Egypt, and there's a whole bunch of things in there that you can dig into if you want, but we're focusing on Miriam. So the next time that Miriam is mentioned is after they flee Egypt. They've gone through all the signs. Moses went to the Pharaoh dozens of times, all of that. They're fleeing Egypt. They're on their way away from that. Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he decides to chase them with his entire army, or at least enough of a portion that felt like his entire army. And when they got to the Red Sea, Moses was able to raise his hand and part the sea. The seabed dried, and they walked across on dry ground. It's after that where Miriam is mentioned again, because he raises his hand once all his people are across the sea, and the sea closes back up. When it closes up, it swallows the Pharaoh and his entire army. This is in Exodus chapter 15. Then when you jump to verses 20 and 21, that's when Miriam is mentioned again. Then Miriam the prophet, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine and led all the women as they played their tambourines and danced. And Miriam sang this song, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. He has hurled both horse and rider into the sea." Not many people, well, I suppose I can't say that here. Now that I'm here, I know more musicians than I used to, but not many people are willing to just stand up and lead worship. That takes a special skill set, that takes a passion and a heart for music, for worship, for God, and that's something that Miriam had. She did this by leading, because the people, it was millions of people. It wasn't just the town of Fargo, whatever size that is. It was a few times bigger than that. And I can't imagine standing up in front of that number of people and trying to lead worship. But she felt the need to celebrate God, to thank him for everything that he had done, for saving them and worshiping him. That's why she did that. She was a leader. She was excited, and maybe her personality, maybe she was a wooer. If you've ever heard of personality types or characteristics, wooing is something that I really do not have. I am like the opposite of a wooer. So there's that. Then there's the third story of Miriam. This is the one that struck out me the most, and the one that I was like, why? So many questions are why when you think about this story. So this is in Numbers chapter 12. Chapter 12, and we're going to go through it piece by piece. So verses 1 through 3. Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his Cushite wife, for he had married a Cushite. Has the Lord spoken only through Moses? They asked. Hasn't he also spoken through us? And the Lord heard this. Now Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. So to clarify, this story is, again, we fast forwarded through quite a few years. They didn't just get saved from Pharaoh and his army. They've been living in a safer environment for quite a few years. Miriam had been a prophetess. She could tell the truth of what God had done. That's what she did when she led worship. But here, after quite a few years, I'm not quite sure how many, but after a few years, she and Aaron started to talk against Moses. And the fact that Miriam is listed before Aaron, that means something. Women weren't typically listed first in the Bible. There's very few times where they were. So what that means is that she approached Aaron. So in the words of a sibling dispute, she started it. Because that's always the point to make, is who started it. Yep. So Miriam was listed first. She approached Aaron and started the conversation, started grumbling, like, why? So many things, why? But to explain this part of this section a little bit more, Cushite. Cushite is a term I'd never heard before, so in their time, a Cushite meant a foreigner. But it's not clear if they were talking about his wife Zipporah, who was Jethro's daughter, or if Moses married again. That's not really clarified anywhere that I could find. And I take that to mean that's not the point of this. It doesn't really matter that he married a supposedly Cushite person. They focused on a detail rather than a serious issue. They couldn't complain about his leadership because he was close to God, had possibly the closest relationship anybody has ever had. So they couldn't pick on Moses or complain about him because he was doing things wrong. So they went to his personal life. They found something that was seemingly meaningless and tried to make a big deal out of it. And what that tells me is that oftentimes the reason behind the criticism is actually more important than the criticism itself. The reason behind why we get emotional, why we start to criticize, there's usually a deeper root cause to it. But we're going to continue reading in the story. So then we'll go to verses 4 through 8. At once the Lord said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, because he heard Miriam and Aaron complaining about Moses, and he heard it. And then he said to them, "Come to the tent of meeting, all three of you." So the three of them went out. Then the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud. He stood at the entrance to the tent and summoned Aaron and Miriam. When the two of them stepped forward, he said, "Listen to my words. When there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, reveal myself to them in visions. I speak to them in dreams. But this is not true of my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak face to face, clearly, and not in riddles. He sees the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses?" So this section of the story confirms what we already know, that God speaks to different people differently. And there are different ways. At that time, very few, if anybody other than Moses, ever got to see God face to face. His glory was too much for what we can understand, what we can comprehend. Most times it was through visions, through dreams. And that had happened before. That had happened numerous times. That's why Miriam was called a prophetess. Aaron was also heard from God, I believe, in a similar way to what Miriam had. And they were able to speak to some effect, but nowhere near to as deep or close as Moses could on what God's direction and guidance was. So in verse 8, God asks them, why were they not afraid to speak against Moses? Most likely, if you stop and think about their relationship, he's their little brother. Why wouldn't they be able to speak against him? He was the annoying twerp that they grew up with or grew up watching, most likely. So I'm sure they had some childhood emotions that had stayed with them through adulthood. And if you're going to take someone for granted and start treating them differently or poorly, it's most likely going to be a family member or somebody that's closest to you. Because we tend to take advantage of the people that are closest because we just assume they're always going to be there. Like that relationship is there. It's forever. So we're going to move on to verses 9 through 16. Then the Lord was very angry with them, and he departed. As the cloud moved from above the tabernacle, there stood Miriam, her skin as white as snow from leprosy. When Aaron saw what had happened to her, he cried out to Moses, "Oh, my master, please don't punish us for the sin we have so foolishly committed. Don't let her be like a stillborn baby, already decayed at birth." So Moses cried out to the Lord, "Oh God, I beg you, please heal her." But the Lord said to Moses, "If her father had done nothing more than spit in her face, wouldn't she be defiled for 7 days? So keep her outside the camp for 7 days, and after that she may be accepted back." So Miriam was kept outside the camp for 7 days, and the people waited until she was brought back before they traveled again. Then they left Hazeroth and camped in the wilderness of Paran. So that's the story that I just think there's so many layers to that we can find out as we go through this. So Miriam, she became a leprous. Her skin was white as snow. Leprosy was something that was highly contagious. It was a highly contagious disease at that time that everybody knew of, everybody feared. And you could say that today's version of leprosy might be COVID from 2020. Everybody was scared of it. Everybody was feared of it. You had to isolate. You had to quarantine. All those drastic things that you had to do, that's how they approached leprosy. But leprosy wasn't used only as an example of punishment or a form of punishment here with Miriam. It was also used as a sign for Moses in his early days. When you go back to Exodus chapter 3 and 4, God does the burning bush, talks to Moses. Of course, that would pause you in your track and go, what is going on? But then when he tells you, you're going to go talk to Pharaoh, what now? I'm sorry. Are you sure you've got the right person? So then he challenges God. Are you sure it's me? God says, yes. Are you sure it's me? Yes, it really is. So God gave Moses different signs. One of them, the burning bush, but he also turned his staff into a snake and then back. And then when that still wasn't enough, he's like, all right, we're going to go more serious. And then he said, stick your hand in your cloak. And when you pull it out, then his hand was as white as snow. He had leprosy on just his one hand. Then he said, put your hand back in, pull it out again. It was clean. So leprosy has been used multiple times because it is something that he couldn't walk away from. Leprosy was so serious of a condition that it was meant as a sign to startle, to repulse any observer, any onlooker. Even though only those 3 were called to the tent of meeting, doesn't mean there weren't people wandering around who were able to see some of what was going on. But that's how serious leprosy was at that time. Leprosy meant that you were unclean. In Mosaic law, there are many different types of cleanliness, uncleanliness, different reasons you could be considered unclean, and every different type had a cleansing process that you had to go through in order to be considered clean again. For leprosy, it meant 7 days of isolation, 7 days outside the camp. And that's just a significant amount of time. If you've ever spent a complete week by yourself, not talking to anybody, phones didn't exist, internet wasn't there. So really, you had time with God or time alone to just go sit and think about what you did is kind of what it sounds like. So then we're going to move on to Aaron. Miriam and Aaron both spoke against Moses. Why didn't Aaron get punished? That was one of my first questions as I was reading through this. That's not fair. Sibling treatment, both kids involved in the problem should get equal punishment, even though she started it. But why wasn't Aaron punished? Miriam was the instigator, which we know because she was listed first. She was the mouthpiece. It doesn't say how long she had to nag Aaron. Can you believe Moses? He's getting all the attention. We talk to God too. He talks through us too. This isn't fair. Why don't we get noticed or why don't we get recognized? I don't know how annoying a sister is to a brother because I don't have a brother, but some of you might know. So that could be part of the process that it took to get Aaron to agree. Yeah, you're right. So Aaron wasn't punished, but as soon as he saw Miriam's punishment, He felt for her. He was scared for her, because leprosy is something meant to startle and repulse anybody who saw it. You didn't want to come close. You didn't want to accidentally touch the person because it was that contagious. So, as a sibling, did you ever do anything with your brother or sister and then realize, gosh, that was kind of a dumb move? Most likely. We all have something like that. And sometimes watching somebody else get punished, that in and of itself can be a form of punishment, especially if you're at least partially responsible. You feel guilty. Why are they getting punished? Why aren't you being held to your part of the problem, part of the story? And Aaron, I think Aaron felt guilty as a co-conspirator, but he was seemingly off the hook. But instead of going, okay, her problem, she started it, she can deal with the consequences. No, he didn't just leave it at that. He still was a good brother, and he pleaded with their baby brother for grace so that Miriam's punishment wasn't a lasting one. So then we go to Moses, the baby brother of the story. He then, taking Aaron's plea seriously, having grace for his sister, went to God and pleaded with God on Miriam's behalf. And think about that for a minute. Moses, who is the one that they were talking against, they were just basically trash talking him to other people who would listen and things, but he didn't hold her words against her or her actions. Instead, he took pity on her and treated her with love and grace. Do we ever do that? I'm not always that good at that. Somebody says something against me or does something or says something about something that I maybe did. It's like, well, what the heck? Like, that's not fair. Why would you say something that's not true or fill in the blank? But I just think that was a pretty impressive thing that Moses did. He held his reaction of what Miriam was doing so that he could respond with love. Do we ever really hold our reaction so that we can truly respond well and with love? It's not that easy to do. I think that's a constant challenge in life as we grow, as we mature. So then God has a big part of this story too, and he heard Moses' request. He explained the punishment, the reason behind it. He doesn't just do things because he's God and he can do whatever he wants. He actually always has context and a reason behind why he does what he does. We don't always hear it, we don't always understand it, but there is a plan behind what happens. And so God heard Moses' request. He explained the punishment, but then he also honored Moses' request. There were still consequences for Miriam's actions, but they were grace-filled consequences. And I think that's something we can easily forget, is that consequences, as good or bad as they are, I don't know that anybody ever calls them good, I guess. So as bad as they are, they're still grace-filled. And this story of the three siblings and their words against each other or for each other stuck out to me for a variety of reasons. But going back to the mouthpiece of it all, Miss Miriam, she is the instigator. She spoke out against Moses. Why? Why would your older sister start talking bad about you? Start trying to stir up trouble? They weren't kids anymore. It wasn't he stole the toy I wanted. It was adults, mature adults, because they'd been through quite a few life experiences at this point. But I think it comes down to emotions. I think she felt things. Was she unhappy with her position in the people, her level of being a prophetess but not being the leader? Did that start to eat away at her? Did she get jealous that Moses was the one who was getting all the attention and all the credit? Because we tend to put our leaders, the people that we revere, so not always all our leaders, but we put people, famous people, on pedestals, even though they don't deserve it. and that can just cause quite a few different emotions. She could be unhappy, she could have been jealous, but she also could have felt overlooked. Like, I'm still contributing to what's going on. Why do I feel like no one sees me? All of those different emotions that she could be feeling could have been the cause. She could have been jealous of his position and the reverence that everybody had for him. Moses, really, if you think about their entire life, he was probably always the talk of the town, from the baby who was found in the river to then the raised as royalty, had to flee, came back, became this impressive leader and did all these things. She was probably always living in his shadow to some degree. And I don't know anybody who likes to live in another person's shadow. I mean, come on, if you think about it, her baby brother probably wouldn't even be there to lead them if she hadn't watched over his journey down the river. At least that could be the story she told herself. Because we all tell ourselves stories that really aren't based on truth. They're based on our opinion and what we feel in the moment. Personally, I think she really felt overlooked. Overlooked and jealous, probably that combination. She had led worship. She had courage. She had been described as a prophetess, for goodness sake. So why was Moses always getting the attention? One of the many reasons that this story stuck out to me is I can relate to Miriam. I don't know if you've heard anything yet that makes you relate to her. Being the younger sibling of two kids, when we, I don't know what age I was in, 6th grade, 5th grade possibly, we lived in a house that backed up to our middle school. So there were soccer fields and tennis courts. And so in the summer, my dad was a teacher. He had all summer off with us and things. And I remember one particular time where my sister, 2.5 years older, he was going to teach her how to play tennis. He played tennis in high school and things, and so we were going to go over to the tennis courts and learn how to play tennis. Great. That sounds awesome. I want to come because she's going to go and they're going to have a good time. I don't want to be left out of a good time. No one does. But I can still, to this day, remember that game of tennis where he was teaching her. How many people does it take to play tennis? 2. I was the 3rd person in that outing. So I, as a little kid who really wasn't nearly as coordinated, I had a racket, and we had plenty of tennis balls, because that's what you do when you play tennis, is you need more than one in case some go flying or whatever. I never got very good at tennis. Also, I'm going to admit that right now, because I spent the entire time, however long it was, maybe it was only an hour. I don't remember those details. I just remember playing at the end of the courts in this corner where there was a wood wall with the little fake net painted on it so then you could play against yourself. That's not fun for any kid. My dad never took me to go learn how to play tennis. He took her. And Dad, if you watch this, I have no ill feelings. It's just a story that I remember of that time where judging the difference between being a little kid and your one side that you think of. But that's one of many times in my life when I've felt overlooked. Never something that is comfortable. I don't know if I even realized it at the time, or I'm sure I did, and then went and pouted in my room and played with my Legos by myself, because Legos were awesome. But one of the many times, or one of the different things, where feelings can get in the way. I've always been a quiet person, at least since my teenage years, or at least in public settings. When it was just our 4 small members of our small little family, believe it or not, I was actually the peanut gallery because I was the youngest. That's kind of the job of the youngest, at least in our family. But you get me in front of anybody else? Nope. The sarcasm has to be earned in a way, I guess, is maybe how my brain is wired. Some people have had the pleasure. So there is that option. I've grown a lot in my quietness. I'm up here, for goodness sake. This is never something that I ever wanted to do. and yet here I am. But again, at my core, at the heart of who I am a thinker. I think more than I talk. My quietness, I'm not sure if it's been due to different things over the years. Part of it, I'm sure, has been a lack of confidence in some situations, a fear of failing, both things that I know a lot of us can relate to. And even beyond childhood, there are many different times where I've felt like I disappeared, even in a group, disappearing in plain sight. That's not something that's comfortable. Every time I would move, because when I went to college, I grew up in Iowa, southeast Iowa. So if you think of the state of Iowa, Minnesota's up here. We grew up way down here, almost to Illinois, almost to Missouri. I went to college on the complete opposite corner of the state. It took 6 hours to drive to the college town, even though there were way closer ones, even in other states. But that's where I wanted to go. I wanted to distance. I wanted adventure. I wanted to be in a different place where no one knew me, because then I could reinvent myself. Even though I was the quiet kid in high school, the smart, studious one, going to college, then I'll be outgoing. College is going to be fun. It's going to be loud. There's going to be lots to do. Then I can become the outgoing and talkative one. Didn't happen. Didn't happen then. Didn't happen when I moved to postgraduate school. State number 2 out of the 5 I've lived in. Tried to reinvent myself a little bit there. Nope. For better or worse, I am just not a wooer. I am not that outgoing person who's going to draw people in. I am a thinker to my core, and my instinct is to look at details and be cautious of both my words and actions, knowing that both things can make such a huge difference. So feeling overlooked or unseen has been a chronic issue for me. It's not constant, it's not 24/7, but there are multiple times throughout my life where I can remember having those feelings. Even, believe it or not, we have an amazing church. Even there have been times amidst our family on a Saturday where I have autopiloted my answer, been here, left, and felt like, okay. No one really saw. Doesn't have anything to do really with any of you, because none of us are mind readers. It's where I let my head get, and the fact that I didn't want to open up. I didn't want to pull anyone aside. I think it's very easy to autopilot our answer of, hey, how you doing? Fine. I don't like that answer, fine. Yet it falls out of my mouth a lot before I can even think about the word that's coming out. That might be the only time words fall out without me thinking about them. But, yeah. So, why do I say that? To share that we all struggle with all sorts of things. We can feel unseen. We can feel overlooked and jealous. These are just some of the feelings that we have had at one point or another, and some of us battle them more than another. Some people battle anxiety, depression, anger management. And honestly, depending upon the moment of life we're talking about, I've probably had each one of those too. Because anger management, yeah, especially in a car, which is why speeding doesn't count for rule following. But I think at the end of the day, we can all agree that it is way too easy to listen to our emotions. When we listen to our emotions, we react. If somebody else did something stupid, of course, it requires a reaction, doesn't it? Or we retreat. We withhold. We reinforce the walls that we've built up around ourselves. All these different things are possibilities, because the cause there, when we start to retreat, withhold, and react, it will depend on the cause behind the emotion. The root cause behind the criticism is more important than the criticism itself. The cause for the emotion is usually more important than the emotion itself, because emotions are temporary. And when you're dealing with an issue where you feel yourself getting emotional, you need to be cautious and check your feelings. Start peeling back the layers, as Carl called it, peeling back the onion. Because have your feelings diverted you away from the real issue? Peeling back the onion is something, I think it's a great analogy. It's a great phrase to describe what that is. Carl mentioned it in the last week or two. I also heard it again this week at a work training thing. It's just so true, because when you can stop and breathe and go, okay, why am I mad? Why am I upset? Why do I feel unseen? It's because of this. Well, somebody cut me off in traffic, or they're not going fast enough. It's an on-ramp, for goodness sake. You're supposed to get up to speed, not just mosey along. If I wasn't late, shockingly, it wouldn't matter as much how slow they're going. But it bugs me. Things bug us for all different reasons. And as we find ourselves in situations where we feel that our emotions start to become our fuel, that's when we need to stop and start peeling back the layers to identify that root cause. That self-reflection is a necessary part of life, not only because it fosters growth, but because it allows us to check on our focus. Am I focused on my feelings? Because I don't know about you, but when I get mad, usually I will get more mad at myself than I will get at any other person on the planet, usually. So am I focused on my feelings, or am I focused on what God says? And you're going to find moments where you can't always tell. If you're too close to it, if your feelings have too big of a fire going up and you just can't even see past it, you might need to ask somebody else, which is okay to do. There have been times in my life where I've had to pull somebody or say, hey, can we have a one-on-one conversation? Pulling people to the side doesn't usually go well for me. There's still too many people around. I'm not going to talk like I would if we're just one-on-one at coffee. But pulling people into what you're going through, where you're feeling, sometimes that's the only way to get clarity. They have an outside perspective. They can see truth and speak truth to you that will help you recenter, refocus, and start to move on. So going back to Miriam's story, I find it interesting that God chose leprosy for her punishment. Something whose only chance at being cleansed, gotten rid of, was isolation for 7 days. And when you read Leviticus, where it talks about the different cleansing processes, it was not just 7 days outside the camp. Then there was an assessment by a priest. And then if you passed the assessment, then you had to shave your head, take a bath, clean your clothes. Everything had to start new. I don't know how many times that actually happened, but that, from what I found, is the most significant, most severe cleansing process for leprosy, for a skin disease. So why did Miriam get it? She didn't do anything as far as associating with the leper colony. She didn't do anything or didn't do that. What she did is she used her words in a negative way. She used her words in a negative way. And as I've dug through this, I think God chose this punishment because he saw her actions, her negative words, as verbal leprosy. Negativity is toxic. It spreads. It's contagious. It goes way faster or farther than you ever think it should. And so him choosing this punishment that was the most severe that I could find of that time shows us that God's opinion of those actions, those words, whether it's dissension, gossip, speaking negative, even though they're just words, we need to think of them as verbal leprosy. God wanted that removed immediately. It's contagious. It spreads way too easy. So do we actually take our behaviors, our words, as serious as we should? Gossiping is so easy to do. Talking negative is so easy to do when you're fueled by your emotions. I get irritated at work, and can you believe what this person is thinking? Like, how can they possibly think that? That's so stupid. There might be a few more colorful words thrown in there some days. Not gonna lie, that does happen. But again, it's fueled by feelings. And we can become fueled by our emotions way too easily. So we have to be mindful of our emotions before they cause us to do or say something stupid. We've already done it how many times, but if we can start to be aware before we do the next one, we have a chance at lessening the frequency of those times. So what else can we learn from Miriam? She was a strong and courageous woman of the Old Testament. She was a leader among her people. She didn't let fear stop her from missing opportunities, even as a kid. Yet despite all of her strengths and good qualities, she was still a human. Just like all our other Bible character heroes, we tend to idolize our heroes, putting them on the pedestals that they don't deserve, because if you give them enough time, they're going to fall off the pedestal anyway. Jacob stole Esau's birthright through conniving, through lying. David had an affair. Jonah ran in the opposite direction of God's calling. So we tend to idolize them, but we all make mistakes. We're all just people, and people are going to people. So one of the big takeaways I learned from Miriam's story is that it doesn't matter how strong you start or how amazing some of your moments in your life are. You're never going to get too old to get past the need to check your attitude, to check your emotions. So I have some fur children. I don't have any human kids, but I have a German Shepherd dog and I have 2 cats. And my dog and I went on a road trip last fall. It was amazing. He was such a good dog. Well, then we got home and my 2 little cats were like, "Where have you been? We want attention from you." Shadow did not appreciate them wanting my attention. He had been my sole fur kid for almost 2 weeks. So then when Fiona, one of my cats, really wants to come and get attention, Shadow will bark at her, he will chase her away, he will do all sorts of things because he's jealous. She can't have you, you're mine. It's not the same exactly, but it's really not as far off from what we sometimes think or do. And don't get me wrong, Fiona gets just as sassy because she is the cat who always has a noise to make or something to say. And when Shadow and I come down the stairs, she'll be sitting like a perfect little statue in the living room, just watching us come down until we get down, and then Shadow gets close and she's like, "No, don't touch me. Stay away." So she gets all feisty as well. So I'm nothing if not entertained at home. As a manager at work, I deal with our team, our workflows, our problems, our fixes. There have been many times where I have read an email or heard a story about something, and my initial gut reaction is like pure irritation. But when I stop and step back and ask questions or reread the email, there's a lot of times where it's not as bad as my gut reaction might say. Thankfully, I have learned to stop and breathe, to respond and not react. Yet there are definitely times I can remember reacting over responding. But we all have moments where we have let our emotions rule us. But we have to remember that we are more than our emotions. We cannot become slaves to them, because when we do, that's when our maturity is limited and our growth is stunted. Initially, Miriam didn't let fear stop her in life. She saw and used the opportunities she was given for good. Yet despite her long faith journey, she still let feelings get in the way. She acted out of jealousy. But our God is a gracious God, even in punishment. And her faulty actions did not negate the good that she had done. Neither do ours. But we need to be mindful of what we let lead us. Are we getting led by our feelings, or are we getting led by what God says? So I have a couple other questions for you as I wrap up today. What or who have you criticized lately? Because that's what Miriam was doing to Moses. She was criticizing him. Have you stopped and thought through why you're being critical or why you were emotional in that moment? The root cause behind the criticism is often bigger than the criticism itself. So have you let your emotions lead you lately? Have you reacted over responding? And if so, do you know why? Because if not, you might want to peel back some layers and start to figure it out. We all have moments where we have feelings that get extra high. And Carl challenged us a couple weeks ago to sit at the feet of Jesus. Just sit quietly and listen. I think that's an amazing thing that we don't do often enough. And I think to build on that, we need to sometimes take just a single thing with us when we go to sit with Jesus. Take one issue, one set of feelings, and lay them at his feet and listen for what he wants to tell you about that specifically. Because his guidance is great. It's amazing. It gives peace. It gives life after emotion. So let's try to make time to do that this week. Let's pray. Hey God, thank you so much for today and for all that you are and all that you've done. God, you are just amazing, and for getting us here and getting each and every person through the week, through whatever it is that they've done. We thank you for all that you are and all that you've done. We can never thank you too much for that, God. I just ask that you be with each and every person here and listening online. Help us to take a breath, to listen to you, to reflect on our choices, on our thoughts and our feelings. They can get away from us way too easily and way more often than we want. So God, I just ask that you be with each and every person and help us to focus on you as we go from here today and go into whatever's waiting for us after this, God. Keep us all safe as we go through this week and help us to find some time where we can spend it with you. Listen to what it is that you have for each and every one of us, because you have something. We just have to listen. Keep us safe and help us to return next week where we can learn from you again, God. Amen.